I'm back. Mr. Clarke's back. Time to take a look at 15.4 Cold War Fears at Home. So many things we'll be looking at here is we'll look at the efforts of President Truman and the HUAC, the House and Un-American Activities Committee, did to help fight communism on the home front. We'll look at some of the domestic spy cases that intensified the fears of communist influence in the American government. We'll analyze the rise and the fall of Senator Joseph McCarthy and the methods of McCarthyism during this period of time in history. Question 1. How did the Cold War influence many aspects of American life? American soldiers fought and died in proxy wars, first in Korea, and later on we're going to see more fighting in Vietnam for very similar reasons. American industries produced weapons and supplies for the Cold War. Americans read daily news stories indicating who was winning the space race and the arms race. The Cold War, in many ways, became a true competition for global influence and to spread the ideologies of the respective sides. So the United States wanted to continue to spread democracy and freedom. The Soviet Union wanted to spread communism and oppression. Boom! Yes, the Red Scare. Let's take a look at that next. Hopefully I didn't scare you there at home. The Red Scare was the fear that communists were working inside and outside the United States to destroy the American way of life. The first Red Scare took place in 1919 after the Communist Revolution in Russia. A lot of countries around the world, including the United States, saw that Russia turned communist and perhaps the United States or other countries could be next. So the Red Scare did resurface here during the Cold War. 3. How did the Red Scare influence America during the 1950s? The Red Scare led to paranoia and unsubstantiated accusations during the 1940s and 50s. Regular, ordinary Americans lost jobs or even went to prison for just being suspected of being a communist. Subversion became a key aspect of the Cold War as some feared that spies would infiltrate the American government, secretly weaken the society, and overthrow it. When the McCarran Act was passed, this restricted immigration inside the United States. Basically, what we're having here is because of the Red Scare, the United States began to really crack down on a wide variety of different things, including additional people coming into the country. They kind of use that as justification and kind of shut the borders a little bit. There's a lot of background checks. People are kind of looking into what you had done, when, where, why. In response to the fear of subversion, President Truman actually instituted in 1947 the Loyalty Review Program. This program actually screened all federal employees to see if there's anything sketchy in your background. And by sketchy, we mean any ties to the Communist Party. 5. How did the program impact the country? Rather than ease fears, it fueled the public belief that if we were doing all this investigating and we were passing all these different programs, there has to be some sort of a problem with communist spies inside government positions or with inside the government itself. 6. How many federal employees quit their jobs or were removed under suspicion of having questionable loyalty? Some 3,000 employees either were dismissed or resigned because of the investigation. So it did have an impact. Many thousands of employees lost their jobs. We'll be mentioning HUAC a few different times. This stands for the House and Un-American Activities Committee. It's a committee in the House of Representatives. There's 435 members in the House of Reps today, and they often have a wide variety of different committees and subcommittees within the House of Reps, and you can serve on those committees. Usually a committee might be 15 people in size. Usually a committee, if it's 15, then would be made up of 8 and 7, 8 Democrats and 7 Republicans, or vice versa, depending upon which political party controls the House of Reps. So, for example, in contemporary society, with Democrats controlling the House of Representatives, then any committee that has 15 or whatever odd number the committee might have, there will always be one more Democratic member than that of a Republican member. So if they vote something out of committee, that obviously the one political party that controls the House of Reps would basically control the committee if they vote only based on party loyalty, which often they do. Too many politicians vote party loyalty over the best interest of the country. That was true back in the 1940s and 50s, and it's certainly even probably more so true in contemporary times. So HUAC was originally founded in 1938 to investigate both communist and fascist activities in the United States. The FBI director at the time, J. Edgar Hoover, requested that it hold public hearings on communist activities in 1947. 8, who were the Hollywood 10. These are left-wing Hollywood writers, actors, directors, all suspected of being communist. They refused to testify in front of the HUAC, the House of Un-American Activities Committee, citing their Fifth Amendment protections so that they don't have to self-incriminate. They were held in contempt, and they were imprisoned for refusal to comply with a congressional subpoena, which is a request to testify. Nine, how did a blacklist impact Hollywood? Well, first of all, you should be familiar with a blacklist. You probably learned about that previously. A blacklist is a list of people who are banned from a particular area. Usually a blacklist is a list of people who cannot be hired in a particular form of employment. In the case here, this blacklist meant you could not be hired in the motion picture industry. Those on the blacklist could not find jobs in Hollywood any longer, and as a result, their careers were ruined. 10, how did the Hollywood 10 and blacklist impact movies? Communist accusations and blacklists caused filmmakers to avoid addressing controversial issues in films. Instead, they created films solely for entertainment purposes. So it had a big impact on terms of, you see this in modern day films. Often films have a political agenda or some sort of message or theme they want to emphasize. Let's say something today in contemporary society, something to do with like social justice. Those are issues that kind of pop up inside movies to kind of push that agenda that the country and society needs to do a better job in some of those areas. So there is some political motives behind it. Usually they're positive. In the case here, obviously, it was a situation where there was concern about the spread of communist ideas, and therefore some of the controversial themes or topics that might be covered in a film were no longer being filmed. So it really watered down films for the most part to basically mindless type of stuff, maybe like musicals or some sort of song and dance type of issue, or comedies, things that really wouldn't address some of the issues of the time. 11, why was no one above suspicion? Well, the Red Scare led to communist suspicions of people from all areas of society, all walks of life. We had mentioned previously over 3,000 government officials lost their jobs. Even J. Robert Oppenheimer, one of the scientists behind the development of the atomic bomb, which helped win World War II for us, was denied access to classified information because his relatives had links to the Communist Party. That's how far this had gone. So perhaps one of the greatest scientists of all time and somebody who was really instrumental in helping to develop the atomic bomb and helping us to win the war was allowed to see the most secret project, the Manhattan Project in the history of our country, was now banned from seeing anything top secret because he had family members, not him, family members who were linked to the Communist Party. That's how far things got out of hand during this period of time. Next, we'll look at some spy cases during this period of time. 12, how did the testimony of Whittaker Chambers in front of the HUAC committee influence the Cold War? Chambers testified under oath that many government officials were also communist spies. This further fueled the Red Scare in America. 13, who was Alger Hiss? What did he do? Hiss was an American government official accused of being a spy in 1948. Chambers claimed that Hiss had given secret government documents to the Soviet Union. Who led the HUAC investigation of Hiss? How did this affect his career? Well, it's kind of an interesting little side note in history. Somebody who was an obscure congressional member. We had made mention earlier that there are 435 members in the House of Reps. I'm sure that if by asking you right now to name the House of Representative person who represents your district in this region of New Jersey. I'm sure many of you might be unfamiliar with that. You can even ask your parents. Maybe some of them know, but maybe some don't. There's a lot of Americans you ask who's your congressional rep, and a lot of people can't name that their congressional rep is Frank Pallone, which is the case for Metuchen, or Chris Smith, who represents me. So there are congressional reps, for every district, for every American in the country. Point being, with 435 members and a lot of people not being able to name their own congressional rep, it's very unlikely that anybody would have known an obscure congressional member from California, from Whittier, California, in the 1940s or 50s. One such person was Congressman Richard M. Nixon from California. He gained national fame as one of the strongest anti-communists in the country. Gained so much fame that he was the VP under Eisenhower from 1969 to 1970. He was a VP under Eisenhower from 1953 to 1961. And he was the president from 1969 to 1974. By abbreviation there, I usually put out the full years and give you the years for the VP. There you go. So VP, Republican under Eisenhower for 8 years, and president. He was elected to 2 terms, but we'll see in history, he made some terrible mistakes and really bad decisions, and ultimately had to resign the presidency. Is the only president in the history of the United States to have to quit. So he goes from basically, somebody of significance and somebody who was very much admired during this period of time to somebody who really disappointed and let down the American public in 1974 when he had to step down from the presidency. Ultimately, he was investigating Hiss and the spy rings during this period of time. In the case of Hiss, they found a microfilm inside a hollowed-out pumpkin on a Maryland farm. These microfilms that they had papers on it. They were nicknamed the pumpkin papers or the documents. Not enough evidence was there to definitively convict Hiss of being a spy. They did get him on perjury charges, and he served 5 years in prison. And because Hiss lied to the court, most Americans made the connection or assumption that he was indeed a spy. 16, explain the events surrounding the Rosenberg spy case. This is one of the more infamous cases in American history. Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were a husband and wife pair. They were scientists. They were accused of selling atomic secrets to the Soviet Union and heading aspiring in the United States. They were both convicted of treason. They denied those charges until their death. They spent 26 months on death row. Death row means that you've been sentenced to be executed, but then you have time for appeals, and so that period of time that you spend is on death row. After 26 months on death row, they were executed. Shockingly enough, they were electrocuted in 1953. Now, the Rosenberg case attracted a lot of attention. It was very controversial during this period of time. Many Americans questioned how the Soviet Union was able to develop the atomic bomb so quickly. And people were terrified to know that our own American citizens had sold the atomic secrets to the Soviet Union, allowing them to develop the atomic bomb. Many estimate it might have taken decades for the Soviet Union to develop the atomic bomb on their own. So they really hurt the American security of our country, because now we could potentially be targeted by atomic bombs that the Soviet Union were now developing. After World War II, mistreatment of Jewish people was also a sensitive subject. So some people felt that the Rosenbergs were being framed because they were Jewish. So there's a lot of tension within the country over this. There's a little visual there if you want to read a little bit more on your own on these topics. I'm not going to read out the chart to you. I believe it's also in your book. 18, how did Project Venona impact the Cold War? Project Venona, American cryptographers cracked the Soviet spy code in 1946. This allowed them to decode thousands of messages from spies in the United States that were being sent back to Moscow. We now had evidence that Americans were spying on the Soviet Union. Americans were spying for the Soviet Union. So when you look at this issue here, obviously it's a situation that was disconcerting for American citizens. Even if you don't put yourself in contemporary times and say, oh my goodness, there's spies in our country reporting to, let's say, Iran or even Russia today or China. This would certainly be something that we'd be concerned about. Why was 1949 a turning point in the Cold War? And we had discussed these issues previously. The Soviet Union had successfully tested their own atomic bomb. The communists took control of China, two destabilizing events during the Cold War. Now we're going to move on to a period of time in history nicknamed McCarthyism, after Joseph McCarthy, pictured there, and something we'll be discussing in more detail as we move forward. 20. Why did Americans fear we were losing the Cold War? Well, we had discovered the Soviet spies. They had developed the atomic bomb. The policy of containment failed in China. All these are reasons why we are feeling that the Soviet Union in 1957 is going to launch Sputnik. So there's a lot of events ongoing in the late 40s and 1950s that kind of make us feel a sense of insecurity about our position in the Cold War. 21. How did a controversial speech by Wisconsin Senator Joseph McCarthy in February 1950 affect the nation? McCarthy claimed in his speech to have a list of 205 members of the United States State Department who were thought to be security risks, 57 known to be members of the Communist Party. If you hear a United States Senator speaking out on a topic, he has a lot of credibility. You figure he's telling the truth, and therefore you take him on his word and the evidence that he supposedly claimed to have. '22. Why did McCarthy's claims get a lot of national attention? The Red Scare led Americans to be less skeptical of these allegations, and we almost assumed these type of things were ongoing in our country. Most Americans believed subversion was a huge problem in our country. McCarthy's case gained tremendous momentum. 23. How did McCarthy's use of the power of his new position as the chairman of the Senate Subcommittee on Investigations in 1952? Once again, very similar to the House of Reps, the Senate also has committees. Similar groupings there, like an odd number with several members on the committee, and it's imbalanced with one more member being of the party that's in control of the Senate. McCarthy had the power to force government officials from this position to testify in front of the committee. This turned into what is remembered as like a witch hunt for communists, or sometimes nicknamed McCarthyism, the ongoing search, or even the idea that if he couldn't find a communist, he would manufacture one. And this witch hunt became with McCarthy doing a lot of finger pointing at people, saying, hey, you are a communist. Yeah, you. Led to the passage of the McCarran Internal Security Act. This required communist organizations to register with the government. So it's kind of a little bit more of an infringement on some privacy issues within society. Did the American public support McCarthyism? Yes, most Americans were concerned about the Communist Party threat, and they were willing to go along with the witch hunt. Many Americans figured it's better to find out and be wrong that there are not communist spies in the government than to do nothing and have spies within the government itself. That's kind of the perspective many had. Explain why McCarthy's reputation was eventually destroyed. Well, he began to accuse members of the army of being communist spies in 1954, and then when they failed to find anyone and he couldn't present any evidence, they demanded the Army McCarthy hearings be broadcast on TV. And you can see McCarthy pictured there in the photograph. He's to the right of the desk. What did the American public witness on TV during this hearing? They saw that McCarthy didn't have any evidence. It seemed as he was just trying to bully witnesses into admitting they were guilty. He was doing a lot of arm twisting. Because of the televised hearings and the fact that McCarthy really didn't have any evidence, he lost all credibility. So much so that the Senate voted to censure him. Censure is not necessarily like an impeachment or removal, but rather a document of formal disapproval of his tactics. He was up for re-election that next term, so they figured rather than go through the whole process of physically removing him, they hoped he would just fade away, which he did. In fact, he died shortly after this in 1957. broken and embittered man, somebody who was disgraced within the public media and within society after what was a pretty long, distinguished career as a politician. 28, what did the downfall of McCarthy demonstrate about the power of the media here in the 1950s? The media served as a check to Senator McCarthy's power. When people saw his bullying tactics on TV, public sentiment on McCarthy turned against him. This showed that TV could have a major impact on the government. So it was maybe the first time that TV really had a huge impact on the government. Lesson reflection question, explain the central idea about McCarthyism and its long-lasting legacy. Well, paranoia, like anti-communist feelings created by McCarthy, can severely damage individuals and even compromise our basic freedoms. So that's a little something to take away in the lesson reflection. Take a moment or two to get down anything you need to. Remember, you could always go back, pause, do whatever you need to make sure you get all the information down. Feel free to rewatch this film as many times as you wish. And remember, until next time, Mr. Clarke is